This is a tutorial to show you how to do a sewn tubular bind-off for 1x1 ribbing. You may have also heard this technique referred to as the Italian tubular bind-off, or simply Italian bind-off. This is a variation of the Kitchener or grafting stitch executed on one needle. This method is great for when you want to create a polished finish on your project with a relatively stretchy edge. Here I have a sample of my Maven hat, and you can see the give in the fabric and the neat stitches at the edge. It looks great on either side, front or back. This is also a great technique to use on sleeve cuffs. There are two main steps to this technique. The first is creating the two sides of the tube in your knitting, and the second is the actual bind-off portion, where we essentially sew the tube closed, binding off the project at the same time. Note that for some projects you can skip the tubular part of this bind-off and simply go straight to the sewn bind-off portion. So here I have done just that on the hem of this sweater, and it still has a really nice finished edge. Be sure to stick around to the end of this video to find out how using combination knitting, even for just one row prior to the sewn bind-off, can make the technique so much easier. To start, we'll focus on the tubular portion of the bind-off. I'll show you what we'll be doing in theory before I show on the swatch. If we pretend that my hands here are the fabric in 1x1 ribbing, my fingers where the nails are up are the knit stitches, and where the pads of my fingers are up are the purl stitches. What we do in the tubular portion is that for each round worked, we isolate only the knit or the purl stitches so that we build the front of the fabric up while simultaneously detaching from the back. This is done by knitting the knit stitches and slipping the purl stitches with the yarn in front. Then on the next round, we build the back of the fabric up to the same level as the front. This is done by purling the purl stitches and slipping the knit stitches with the yarn in back. What you end up with is a front fabric and a back fabric. If we turn this to the side, then we see two new pieces of fabric formed by the knit stitches over here and the purl stitches over here. Then in the final step, we'll close these together to make the tube. Here's my swatch, which I've worked up in a simple 1x1 rib. So let's create our tube. This first stitch on the needles is a knit stitch. So we're going to work that stitch as normal. And then the second stitch is a purl. So we're going to slip that stitch. We're going to bring the yarn to the front and then slip that stitch as if to purl. Then bring the yarn back to the back and knit the next stitch. Yarn comes to the front, slip this with the yarn in front, and yarn goes back to the back. Knit with the yarn in back, move the yarn to the front, slip this stitch with the yarn in front. Knit, bring the yarn to the front, slip that stitch. Bring the yarn to the back, knit, and so on. I'm going to show English style for you English knitters. Whoops, we're on a purl stitch, so we need to slip with the yarn in front, bring the yarn around to the back, and knit. Bring the yarn to the front, slip, bring the yarn to the back, and knit. Whoops, yes. So we'll keep going that all the way around to the beginning of round. Here you can see we've worked all the way back to the beginning of round. This last purl stitch has been slipped and that yarn tail is just loose to the front. So we're gonna get back to our beginning. Move this yarn tail behind the knitting needle. This first stitch again is knit. So with the yarn in back, we're going to slip that stitch off the needle, move the yarn to the front, and purl. Move the yarn tail to the back and slip that knit stitch, move the yarn to the front and purl. Now I'll show a few stitches English style. Oops. So my yarn is in back. I'm going to slip that knit stitch and then move my yarn to the front and purl. Yarn moves to the back, slip the knit stitch, move the yarn to the front and purl. Whoops. English style is not my forte. And we'll continue in this manner all the way again to the beginning of round. So here I've gotten back to my beginning of round. I've actually gone ahead and done an additional round where I'm working only the knits and then an additional round of only working the purls. Most patterns will either call for 2 rounds in this way or 4 rounds in this way. So if you're doing 2 rounds, then you work 1 round working only the knits and then 1 round working only the purls. And then if you're doing 4 rounds, then you do a knit round, a purl round, a knit round, and a purl round. Just be sure to follow your pattern's instructions. For the sewn bind-off portion, we will need scissors and a tapestry or darning needle. I've already gone ahead and cut the length of my tail to be 4 times the circumference of the piece that I'm working. If you are working on a hat that's 24 inches or 60 centimeters, then you'll need a tail that's 96 inches or 240 centimeters long. As for the tapestry needle, I like to use these ones with the bent tip. It just helps me access the stitches more easily. There are 2 main rules to keep in mind when working a sewn bind-off in 1x1 rib on a single needle. One is that once we get past the setup, we're always working the next 2 knit stitches or the next 2 purl stitches at any given time. The second thing we want to keep in mind is that we always want to prep stitches in the opposite way that they appear on the needle and remove stitches from the needle in the same way that they appear. So we'll prep knit stitches purl-wise and take them off the needle knit-wise. Similarly, we'll prep purl stitches knit-wise and take them off the needle purl-wise. Before we get into the rhythm of this bind-off, we have to do a setup step to prep these first 2 stitches on the needle. So this first stitch is a knit stitch. We're going to prep that one as if to purl. So we take our tapestry needle, insert it into the knit stitch as if to purl, and then pull the yarn tail through. This second stitch is a purl stitch. Here's where some of the acrobatics come in. We're going to prep this one as if to knit. So that means we need to insert our needle between these 2 stitches, give it a little turn, and enter that stitch as if to knit. So you can see I've entered through that stitch. Now we're going to pull the yarn tail through. So that's our prep, and we can start into the rhythm here. In this first step, we're going to work these first 2 knit stitches here and here. We're going to start by removing this first stitch off of the needle as if to knit. So we insert the tapestry needle as if to knit and take it off the needle. Then we keep our yarn in front and prep this next knit stitch as if to purl. So we're skipping the purl stitch, we're entering the knit stitch as if to purl, and pulling the yarn tail through. Now we're going to be working these next 2 purl stitches, the first and third. So we're going to remove this first purl stitch off of the needle as if to purl. Then we bring our needle around to the back and we push, same as in the setup, we push that needle through now what's the first and second stitch on the needle. Give it a turn and through that purl stitch as if to knit and pull the yarn tail through. Here I am at a knit stitch. So I'm going to remove that knit stitch as if to knit, skip the purl stitch, enter the knit stitch as if to purl, pull the yarn tail through. Now we'll work the purl stitches. Remove as if to purl, insert between these next two stitches, prep this as if to knit. Remove this knit stitch as if to knit, skip the purl stitch, enter the next knit stitch as if to purl. Remove the purl stitch as if to purl, skip the knit stitch, prep this next purl stitch as if to knit. You want to make sure that you are keeping this yarn tail below the knitting needle so nothing's getting tangled in there. And then the other thing that I like to do, I pull fairly taut, not super tight, and then I give it a little, once everything's prepped, I give it a little tug. So let me demonstrate that. Give it a tug and then pull that back out to get the right tension. Pull it back out and get the right tension. If you're anything like me, you find the process of prepping the purl stitch to be the absolute worst part of this technique. It's pretty fiddly and requires some acrobatics to get the darning needle between the stitches and rotate it around to work through the purl. I discovered something as I was experimenting with knitting ribbing using combination ribbing. I'll put a link below on the basics of this method, but the result is that your purl stitches get mounted with that leading leg of the stitch behind the knitting needle. So typically you see it mounted like this for a normal purl stitch, but here I have it mounted backwards. I've already gone ahead and done this for the remainder of my swatch. So if your purl stitches are mounted like this, it makes that prep stitch an absolute breeze. Let me show you. So this first stitch, I need to take off the needle as if to purl. So I just make sure I'm going into that leading leg from behind and I remove it from the needle. Then if I flip to the back of my work here, look at that. My leading leg is right there. I don't need to go in between any stitches. I just lift it up and pull it through to prep it. Working the knit stitches is exactly the same as normal because those are still mounted correctly, or at least the way that I learned to knit. So I knit that one off, prep this one as if to purl, and I'll show you again on this next purl stitch. So I remove that purl stitch as if to purl, come around to the back, and that leg is right there for me to pick up. So here I am at my last two stitches. I'm going to knit this one off. I don't have anything to prep, but what I like to go into this stitch that's already on, already been worked to finish it off. And I essentially kind of come back and prep that one again. And then I can purl this one off, and then I find the next purl stitch and kind of prep it, although that's not the right word. Then I can just go back through and tidy those stitches up when I weave in my ends. So the result is a nice stretchy bind off and a lovely finished edge. Thanks for following along, and I hope you learned something new today. Bye.